So yeah, welcome to our Board of Commissioners meeting. This is 1 o'clock Monday, August 21st, 2023. Is there citizen input for items not on the agenda?
Was I supposed to sign a form or something?
We have a blue page around here somewhere sometimes, but please join us. Yeah,
Okay,
this is regular citizen input.
right. You want me to do it from here?
You can do it from the table. Oh, then you end up on the screen
Oh, God, yes. I see.
so the world can see you.
Commissioners, my name is Don Senecal and I live at 61345 Fairfield Drive in Bend, Oregon. My wife and I moved here from Tacoma, Washington in 2005. I operate a small business as a contract grant writer primarily for social service organizations in Central Oregon. I am here today to present you with a proposal related to the wildlife disasters that are taking place all around us and have been increasingly deadly and destructive for more than a decade. Our health, our children's health, our livelihoods, and our very lives are more and more at risk, while during the same period of time, more and more funds, people, and physical assets have been dedicated to reducing or eliminating such devastation. I submit to you that the investments here and elsewhere have not delivered on any level of expectation. More people and animals die each year, more natural and economic assets are destroyed, and more personal property and even our dearest memories are falling to the devastation that remains unchecked. The proposal that I have prepared today is twofold. First, it concentrates on the very best possible assets available to kill initial fires, regardless of location or weather conditions. Two, it addresses the administration of these assets beyond the present structure in order to eliminate bureaucratic and authority clashes at the most critical moments. I believe that change should begin locally with local support and awareness where it is felt most critically. I also realize that change on any scale is problematic and a challenge for any and all governing structures. I truly believe that this proposal is presented in the best and most heartfelt sincerity for your honest consideration. Thank you for your time and patience. I have copies for each of you and some extras as well.
Thank you very much, Don.
Thank you.
Is there any other public testimony? What? Anybody have one? So seeing none, so Department of Forestry, wildfire hazard mapping.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Your Planning Manager, Will Groves. I've got with me today Kyle Collins, who's been working on our fire mapping efforts over the years, as well as County Forestry Kevin Moriarty. I'm here today to talk to you about an upcoming Oregon Department of Forestry wildfire hazard meeting. This is, I'm here for you today to seek board direction as it pertains to offering technical input to the ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry meeting that will be occurring on September 21st of this year. And it pertains to wildfire hazard maps. Just kind of big picture is that the new maps are anticipated. We'll likely get to see those a little bit before the September 21st meeting. And ODF will be asking counties and specifically government representatives for some initial feedback on that. Some background on this, of course, I know you've all been tracking it in 2022. ODF and OSU, Oregon State University, worked on administrative rules and wildfire mapping to try to categorize wildfire risk hazard for different properties in the state of Oregon and to look at what sort of building precautions and or defensible space might be appropriate to that. Under that scheme, properties were going to be assigned to a category and also identified if they were in the wildland urban interface and then targeted for regulation potentially based on that. On August 4th of last year, the map was temporarily withdrawn and for refinement, and the refinements were intended to incorporate feedback that was received from more than 2,000 Oregonians. So in Senate Bill 80 passed in the 2023 legislature, asked that the Oregon Department of Forestry do some updates and work before the map goes public again. There's some changes in there. There's a change in the name from wildfire risk map to hazard map, wildfire hazard map, from 5 categories of hazard to 3, and some rules and ways that public engagement would be rolled out. First engagement is Oregon Department of Forestry and Oregon Association of Oregon Counties are hosting a map meeting following the AOC Fall District meeting on September 21st, in Klamath Falls. And Senate Bill 80 says that at this meeting, Oregon Department of Forestry is to meet with county commissioners and staff to give comment on the map. The counties will then be given subsequently another opportunity to meet with the staff before the latest map iterations come out. And then following that, public engagement would be rolled out for that map. And so this is really just kind of a heads up that this is coming. We haven't seen the maps. We haven't seen particular implementations of them. Once we see those maps, we'll be back in front of you to let you know what we've received, what we saw, any feedback that we have for you, any feedback that you'd like for us to carry forward potentially to the meeting at Klamath Falls on September 21st, how you'd like us to engage at that meeting. So at this point, there's nothing for you to respond to. I just wanted you to be aware of this upcoming opportunity and that it'll come with a relatively short fuse.
So that's a month from now. And then do we know what like the R327 fire hardening standards, where is that? Do we already know upfront what's going to be the triggers for requiring different defensible space or fire hardening?
We haven't seen if, and I've got Kyle with me here to jump in if there's if I don't have this right, but my understanding is that we haven't seen how those would plug in to the new 3 category system. Presumably the high category would trigger the R327, but what happens at the mid category in terms of defensible space and hardening, that is, we're not aware of at this time.
Do you think it's just the high category, Commissioner?
That was my understanding, but I don't have a definitive answer on this.
Yes,
I can jump in. Yeah, for the record, Kyle Collins, Associate Planner. It is just the high category. So the only thing that's changed with Senate Bill 80 is rather than high and extreme and the wildland urban interface layer being the triggering factor for defensible space and R327 building code standards, it's now just the high standards since they've dropped it down to the 3 categories, as well as inclusion in what's ultimately defined as the wildland urban interface.
well, and as I say, I remember we did a risk map analysis previous to this years ago now. And most of the county we would conclude is probably in a high category anyways, finding how the terminology works, but forested areas, we kind of have a feel for what a wildland urban interface is and how the collaboratives treated it over the years. So we've got some good foundation to that, but it'll be interesting how we put all these together.
The real concern at the local level when the first round of draft maps came out was areas of the county that are in many cases irrigated agricultural lands. And you can certainly make an argument if you live on an irrigated farm that if you can apply water to the ground, that the fire behavior, if there's ignition on your farm, it shouldn't be too severe. When I actually attended the open house that Oregon Department of Forestry and Extension provided on the draft maps, and when I stayed after, I talked with the map makers a little bit more, and they said, well, a lot of these areas are yes, if a fire starts, they're likely to have pretty good fire behavior mitigation measures in place, but the ignition risk is still significant, like basically, all of this area to the east of Bend and around Redmond, that's, used to be sage steppe ecosystem, now has a bunch of juniper in it, now has a bunch of people in it. There is just a very high probability that a fire is going to start there. And so that is the reason that the areas were mapped as high risk. We were still talking about a risk map. And I would anticipate that those areas are still going to be marked as high hazard when we see this next round. And I think that's an important thing for us to talk about and kind of think about, what our position will be on as we look forward to these next drafts coming out, maybe in like 2 weeks. I mean, if it's 2 weeks before the September 21st meeting, then that's early September. So, I think we should be prepared to see draft hazard maps that still show a lot of irrigated acres in Deschutes County as high hazard. And it's not because of what the fire will do when it ignites there. It's just the probability of ignition. And I think the modelers can make the argument that the ignition risk is significant in large parts of the county, as our own previous mapping efforts showed. So, I don't know exactly how you go from having mapped properties to compliance with the R327 building codes and with defensible space requirements. But what I would expect to happen is that an area could be potentially identified as high hazard. Someone who represents the state fire marshal or the local fire district will visit that property owner. They'll take a look around. They'll say, yeah, you have a high ignition risk, but essentially you already have defensible space because you have sprinklers all surrounding your home here. Defensible space requirements are met. And if you ever want to build a new house on this property, you'll have to follow the R327 building codes. And that'll be the end of it. As best as I could guess, that's what the implementation of Senate Bill 762 actually looks like for those properties. To me, that is an acceptable government intrusion in people's lives to help protect whole communities from the risk of high severity wildfire.
There was a guest column in the paper. Did you put this in our boxes or?
We did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So talked about the wildfire risk map and insurance rates, and good things we can be doing as a community.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on the positive side, mapping where we have high probability of fire and also areas where if fire starts, the behavior is going to be challenging, where we're going to have severe fire, actually helps us focus our attention on what needs to be done to reduce the risk for those properties.
But I always go back to 150, 200 years ago, and before that, a natural lightning strike fire would start somewhere, and it would just be a slow walk across the forest floor, and it would happen regularly. So we live in a fire adapted place where we've let the fuel grow, and now we're in a situation where it feels like we're so threatened by it. But if we ever got to that place where there's less fuel and less understory under the big ponderosas like it used to be just 125 years ago, we don't have to think of it as just big threat. So as I say, that's just a vision, something that was many years ago now. Well,
And I'd love to say something because Don and I were talking about junipers before the meeting started today. And yes, they are the invasive species of Central Oregon. And the sooner we remove more of them, I call them Roman candles, the better it is for our community for the amount of moisture they suck out, for the bitter brush that the deer should be eating, and for the sage grouse. So those juniper have really, we've got to look at a picture from maybe 80 or 100 years ago and see what they have done. Now, someone said, oh my gosh, Patty, if we remove all of them, we're going to look like Reno, or we're going to look like Las Vegas. But, you know, leave a few per acre, but we need to really attack those. And you saw what happened with the invasive species in Hawaii. That was invasive grasses. And it's just, you know, hopefully Doug's going to be online, and Doug will hear my plea again about removing more juniper, our lobbyist, for next year.
I guess I just say. I share the goal of restoring the sage steppe, so that there's a lot less juniper and there's a lot more bunch grasses and shrubs. I share the goal of restoring our forests, so we have many fewer and much larger trees and a grassy understory, and all of those things make our landscape A, more fire resilient, and B, allow fire to do its natural thing in our community, which is return on a frequent basis. But you know, even if you could kind of restore the vegetation, you know, to historic conditions on the landscape, on the, you know, in the wildland landscape across the area, the things that are different now are A, we have a whole bunch of houses and fences and other things, out accessory structures scattered across the landscape, and those are fuel potentially. And B, we have ignition sources like we never had in the thousands of years before human settlement of this area. So we really do need to think about what happens, not just in the rangelands and in the forest, but in the built environment. And that's the focus really of those requirements that are connected with these maps. The focus is requiring defensible space around homes, and the focus is requiring fire resilient building materials and practices when people do build in those high risk areas. So we can share the goal of restoring the wildland landscape to more resilient vegetative conditions, but we have to think about the built environment, and that is in many ways the entire point of the maps that are the subject of discussion today.
Great. Okay, so 1 month from now, we'll all get together. So we'll have some staff down there. Climate Falls also. So it'll be our AOC District 2 meeting, plus this wildfire.
Thank you, Don.
Yeah, and specifically, we'll be back, once those maps drop, we'll be back as soon as practicable to talk to you about what we've seen, give you some feedback, and then see what type of response you'd like from staff to that. Would you like us to go remotely? Or are you going to bring take a car down and speak to them in person? All these are options.
You could ride a horse. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just have to get an early start.
Yes. Very early start.
Thank you, commissioners.
That'd be about a 3-day ride. So
At least 3.
So Kevin, do you have any thoughts? So Project Wildfire. So think about it. I mean, we've been serious about this since the 90s, since Darby Hall fire, defensible space, neighborhood associations, fire-wise communities, the whole thing. So we should always be advocating, promoting, and I guess, yeah, come on up to the table.
My 2 cents essentially is I support the idea of creating some objectives for defensible space and home hardening. Establishing a code. I think those are all good strikes as far as getting more folks on board. I'm very hesitant on tying a risk or a hazard to a map. I think that there's going to be a lot of inaccuracy with that map, even after it's been redone. And that the part, there's going to be folks that probably fall out of that map that don't even get rated as moderate or low, or well, not even high even. And then there's folks that are probably going to be ranked high that probably aren't deserving of that as well. And so it's really what percentage of accuracy, is that going to fall into? And then if there are to be changes made with the map, is that gonna be put on the county or is OSU gonna take on those changes? Because that could be very labor intensive if there's lots of inaccuracies.
It's interesting, you talk labor intensive. When I lived in LA County, the fire department came to my house every year with a clipboard and you shall do this and you shall do this. And if you don't do it, we will do it for you and it's gonna cost you like 5 times more. Now, I know that's way too big of a government overreach here in Oregon, but still, that was an incredibly intense event. And, you know, I've tried to politely tell a couple of my neighbors, oh my gosh, you need to clear up your space a little better, you know, just say it to them as gently as I can, but it really does make a difference when, if there's wind blowing and, you know, fire starts in the neighborhood. You know, who's gonna be really dependable, and those people that have their firewood stacked on their house, that's just like, oh my gosh, and you see that in the city of Bend. I see people with, you know, firewood stacked, and I'm just thinking like, that makes their house just incredibly difficult to be protected. And yet insurance companies are getting, you know, they're getting more on top of what the real situation is with the risk factors. You know, you see what Farmers is doing and State Farm is doing, and yet I'm really hoping that next legislative session, our state will actually improve the Oregon plan, the fire insurance plan, because at one point in time I had to go on the California plan. That's something that nobody wants to have to do, but Oregon needs to get their plan up to a higher standard. I've heard different things about it, so. Anyway, do we still have grant funding for juniper removal, Kevin?
We have lots of grant funding opportunities for defensible space.
Right,
Which
so we do have that funding.
Yeah. Have through different mechanisms, through different agreements, basically, they all essentially are focused on treating that 100-foot around your structure. And so that would include moving juniper, whatever your hazardous fuels are.
And just like this last weekend, the fire in by Spokane, I had people I knew that they had to turn their horses out. It was that bad and it was that fast. And, you know, that's incredibly frightening. So, yeah, I know of a family who lost everything. Somehow they got their animals out and their 4 kids.
Well, then for Project Wildfire, it's time for, you know, planning for the fall season, what kind of cleanup can be done around anybody's personal property. And say if you live on a few acres and you're not in Deschutes River Woods specifically, I get just the smoke is my point. So you know, it's okay to have a little cleanup fire when the fire district says it's time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we do better than a lot of counties as far as promoting our information on home hardening, defensible space. We have a lot of people that voluntarily do that work. So I think we're in a good direction, but this map could change things to some extent.
Yeah, well, and then as I say, there's Project Wildfire Committee, community members. So has this been talked about or will be talked about this next month around?
We've been bringing it up as far as, you know, the big hesitation, the big thing where it probably affects community members is updating our CWPPs, wildfire protection plans. We have 2 that we're trying to update right now. And we utilize Oregon Risk Explorer and all the data that's within that to do a qualitative or quantitative risk assessment. And we don't have that data right now. So we're kind of just waiting on that. So that's probably the big thing that we have to let folks know, that we're not really proceeding with these plans until we get this.
Well, that's interesting. So you started using that as a tool, kind of disconnected from the fire map specifically, but I mean, they have the whole state mapped out by properties and you can zoom in and out. So now it's not available currently because of this map situation.
We have the 2018 data
Okay.
available,
Yeah.
but they actually have a pretty unique system where you can actually you can do a risk assessment for your community using that data.
Yep.
So and there's other programs that can do that, but they're a little more complicated and it'd be a lot easier to use a user-friendly program like Oregon Explorer to do this, and then we can use it, you know, into the future as well.
Are there other community efforts like this around the state that are doing this for the CWPPs? I know we have multiple ones in our county. Some counties just have one.
Yeah.
Are they using this tool though, this Oregon Explorer, you know?
I believe so. I'm not 100% sure on that. I believe like Jefferson and Crook have both used it as well.
Well, because this may be an opportunity to kind of compare amongst ourselves at that meeting. You know, talk about our CWPPs for a few moments. It may be valuable, in fact, for the Department of Forestry and whoever else is attending for feedback to talk,
Yeah.
to hear about what we do with our CWP.
Yeah.
And they may know already.
That they do track.
Yeah.
WPP efforts and, I don't know where we're at right now, but as of a few years ago, there were many counties that had not had any CWPP updates since the original ones were developed a couple decades ago. So I mean, we are, James County is the exception.
Well, so I'm just thinking the topic for that meeting, it'd be good maybe bring that up, the fact that, you know, we do have our multiple CWPPs, we do keep them up rotated on a 5-year basis. And then just making sure, you know, Crook, Jefferson, Klamath and Lake, you know, either they're up to speed on it or if we help them or, you know, understand how valuable this tool is. So I'm just thinking it could be a quick agenda item we could propose.
So Kevin, how many Firewise communities are we up to now?
We have 62 that are certified within that county and 69. So there's 7 that are pending. So,
Okay, 7 pending.
yeah.
I mean, I think that the discussion after the AOC district meeting is really gonna be focused on the maps themselves. I do think it's a meaningful question, a question that needs to be asked. You know, how do homeowners, how do communities, how do neighborhoods get credit for the work that they've done? Either in the maps or with insurers. And that's, I mean, that's, for me, that's the really big question that we need to be grappling with at this point is, you know, we need to encourage people to do, you know, to make their homes and their neighborhoods more resilient. You know, how do you encourage that? Well, you know, one, you have the sticks, the regulatory sticks, but I mean, the most obvious carrot, you know, to me seems to be, you know, people's home insurance premiums. So, you know, how do we do that? How do we get insurance companies to recognize what neighborhoods, what individual homeowners, what whole communities are doing? You know, I think that's the $1 million question. And, you know, before you guys take off, I do just want to kind of check how this is going to flow. I would anticipate that the conversation after the AOC district meeting being pretty lively on this topic. And I'd like us to have our, you know, kind of Deschutes County thoughts formulated before we go in there. So we will get, we'll see these draft maps sometime, hopefully in early September. And we will definitely have a chance to have another work session before the AOC district meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
that's the expectation.
Okay.
There is some possibility that the maps aren't released in a timely manner.
Okay.
You know, I think
I
maybe,
mean, even if the maps aren't released in a timely manner, maybe we can still schedule a work session.
I was headed the same direction. I think that what we would do is we would default, since that's on Thursday, September 21st. I anticipate, regardless of the maps, I would go ahead and put in for a Monday, September 18th meeting update with the hope that the maps are in hand at that meeting, or if at minimum to let you know that the maps are not in hand at that meeting. We'll be here on that day.
Thank you.
Great. So yeah, we'll get together right before it if we have content. This has been a good discussion and preparation.
Thank you.
I just remember that I was supposed to be insured by USAA after the fire went around us and we lost one tree and my hay. And they were like, absolutely no way are we going to insure you. We had to wait a couple of years for them to pick us back up. Because once you have a fire, then the insurance companies get incredibly nervous. So, you know, and I go like, we're not gonna have a fire again, everything burned, and they could have cared less.
Okay, thank you so much. So, item number 2, update from Northwest Policy Advocates. Status?
Yep, commissioners, for the record, Whitney Hale, Deputy County Administrator, Doug Riggs, the county's lobbyist, has joined us virtually today. Doug will be providing the board with the legislative updates, beginning to have some preliminary discussions about potential legislative priorities for the upcoming short session. So we've done a little bit of pre-work with departments to kind of scope issues that may be on their minds, but mostly today is just a chance for you to hear from Doug and begin those conversations with him.
Good afternoon, Doug. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. Good to see all of you. I'll be heading over there tomorrow, but tomorrow is not today, so I'm virtual today.
Gotcha.
You could have.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, thanks very much. Appreciate the time. I don't think this will take a half an hour, and I'll leave lots of time for questions here at the end. But let me just give you a quick update. As I mentioned in the presentation last month, the 2023 session was a fairly difficult session. I think everybody was glad to be done and glad to get out of town. It was complicated for a lot of reasons. The construction, I think, really added an element that people didn't anticipate. I mean, they anticipated it, but they didn't realize how much it would impact things. And then the last few days were just, treacherous. There were bills that the governor wanted to get passed, House Bill 3414 in particular. There were bills that the legislative leadership wanted to get passed that they had trouble getting passed. At the end of the day, as I mentioned last month, 3 bills failed on the final day, which I have never seen, and I can't find anyone who remembers anything like that. So left, I think, some bruised feelings. There was we had the Republican walkout earlier, and then we had a Democrat walkout on the last day. Mark Meek, after his bill went down, walked out, so he wasn't around for the rest of the day, and that complicated the passage of the other 2 bills. So I think people were happy to get out of town. People were slowly kind of re-engaging. I'm seeing quite a few legislative town halls that are taking place. Legislators are trying to figure out the lay of the land. We anticipated that there would be an emergency board meeting in September, but that is apparently off the table. It's not clear whether there will be any board meeting in November or even January either. The Ways and Means co-chairs seem to be telling people that, hey, whatever you need to get funded can wait until February of 2024, which, is, you recall, will be a short session, 35 days. So things may be a little slower than usual in the interim. Doesn't mean that they won't be active. There will be interim hearings on the 28th and 29th of September, more interim hearings in November, and then more hearings in January. I will say there was a lot left behind, and I mentioned this in the report last month, but in talking to people, talking to my fellow colleagues, talking to legislators, there are some big ticket items that should have been funded or should have been addressed that weren't, and those include public health. That really got left behind, and I'm sure the county is well aware of that. A lot of the individual behavioral health bills, especially on workforce, didn't get passed. Chatted with the Ways and Means co-chairs, and their perspective is, well, we gave these big pots of money to OHA and DHS, and we told them to fix the problem. But the issue with that is that agencies are taking so long to get money on the street these days that I have very little confidence that money will come out to a county or come out to a behavioral health provider anytime in the next 12 to 18 months. And so the delay in allocating money for things like public health and behavioral health, even if there's a big pot someplace in a budget, is pretty severe, and something that I think we need to fix. Another issue that they left behind was local housing infrastructure. The legislature did provide about $500 million for the LIFT program. The LIFT program is the bonding program for building housing, but there is no money in the budget for providing to cities in particular, but also counties, money to build out the infrastructure that's necessary to make those housing developments actually work, or to approve them in the first place. And I think that's a really really a big opportunity for the 2024 legislative session to come back and put together a housing infrastructure package. You can't build a housing development without sewer and roads and streets, electrical and sidewalks and things of that nature. And I've been talking to legislators about that recently. So I do think that that's an opportunity. You know, the good thing for Deschutes County is the courthouse money was allocated, general fund money. It's secure. We don't have to worry about coming back in 2024 on that. So that's from a financial standpoint, a good thing. I will say just a couple timelines. I mentioned e-board won't be happening. There will be some hearings in September. The bill filing deadline is now in November. So it's been pushed back a ways. However, most legislators, it appears, already have decided what their 2 bills will be. And there's a bill limitation for 2024, which has been pretty typical. Last time around, it was 1 bill for a senator and 2 bills for a House member. The senators weren't very happy about that, so they got leadership to at least give them an equal number of bills. So 2 and 2, and then committees, which in the past have had 5 or more in the short session, are being limited to 3. So the number of concepts that are going to be able to be covered is going to be, pretty dramatically restricted, which I think for a short session makes sense. But should we decide to ask for a bill to be introduced, we'll really have to scramble and find someone who might be able to co-sponsor it and introduce it. I think the last thing I'd say is, there have been rumblings and rumors and press releases and some articles in the paper about whether or not there will be a walkout or there won't be a walkout. I think that's a political dust up. I think most legislators on both sides of the aisle that I've talked to say that, a short session is really for 3 things. Number 1, addressing any budget issues that may have come up, reconciling agency budgets that may need to be reconciled, transferring money between important programs. So adjusting the budget, that's number 1. Number 2 is getting to bills that they couldn't quite get to at the end of the session. So they didn't quite get to the public health bill. They didn't quite get to a bunch of those behavioral health bills. Didn't quite get to local housing infrastructure. Those are things that were discussed in the previous long session, vetted, went through a committee, often went to Ways and Means and died. And those types of bills tend to take precedent over brand new concepts. So bills that have been vetted before. And then the third is just, really good new concepts or ideas. And there's no shortage of what legislators think are great ideas. So there will be that third category of bills that either the governor wants to get introduced or legislators think are important. So last thing I'll say is what we talked about, potentially, working with our allies in the region on some sort of a summit. I've been talking to legislators about that. I think that the only time to do that would be October before the snow starts falling if we want to get people to come over from the valley. And it looks like October is going to be a very difficult month. There are some out-of-state conferences for legislators. There is some in-state training for legislators. So the recommendation I'm getting back from most legislators is that's the kind of thing they'd like to do next spring in a year with a short session. Come over in late April, early May. Spend 2 or 3 days, not feel under the gun. So I'll come back to you folks with a little more details and a recommendation around that probably in the next 30 to 45 days. But that's the feedback I'm getting from folks. So I think I'll stop there and certainly take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. So we do have maybe some department head ideas. I know one of the topics that is going to pop up for us is this clear and objective standard for land use. When it comes to Deschutes County, we just got all the the whole big picture on this, and it looks like a huge project. And it boils down as the goal 5 inventories kind of takes it to the next level. So there was some discussions earlier today about that. Yeah, Peter, if you're ready, we can talk about that a little bit. Explain.
Yeah, Tim. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, Will Groves, our planning manager, and I met with the chair this morning just to talk about House Bill 3197. As you're well aware, Doug, the -3 amendments that were adopted and signed into law provide a just less now than a 2-year window. The law comes into effect July 1st of 2025, and it would require clear and objective housing standards and procedures on 3 areas: in unincorporated communities, on non-resource lands, and in exception lands. And what we talked about maybe 6 weeks ago is a couple of possibilities. One is, in the short session, is there the possibility to engage legislative representatives, other counties, Oregon Property Rights Association, to see if they would be open to a conversation of refining this new law. Just as the chair noted, for us and maybe 2 or 3 other counties that have extensive wildlife and floodplain zoned properties, to establish clear and objective standards will be time consuming and likely litigious. So, we've thought about one thing that came up organically. Will Groves thought of it this morning. Is there a possibility to get an additional extension for those counties that have those Goal 5, Goal 7 characteristics? Washington County has been mired in litigation since 2017, stemming from a LUBA case that broadened the clear and objective standards for housing beyond urban growth boundaries to all rural lands, including farm and forest zone lands, which is what House Bill 3197 is adopted for, narrowed to just those 3 areas that I summarized. So that was a concept. Another concept was, admittedly, is it possible to exclude those lands under those 3 categories: unincorporated communities, exception lands, non-resource lands that have these Goal 5, Goal 7 acknowledged overlay zones and development standards. At the end of the day, for Deschutes County, and I think we've been very clear to this, while we certainly are not trying to communicate that we're against clear and objective housing standards, we understand the importance of it. Looking at Washington County, however, is a warning that if we're not careful, all of Deschutes County's long-range planning resources could be devoted to this project over a multi-year endeavor, and it could get costly and expensive just due to the litigation that we're seeing in Washington County. I think it's very likely that Deschutes County could find itself in the same circumstance.
So as I said, it's just an idea at this point in time. We'll figure out what, if there's support for an ask here, definitely defining a legislative ask. But yeah, making the path a little bit more clear for resources is the problem here, because we go down some of these paths and it becomes litigious. All of a sudden, we've spent 2 years, we got all of our eggs in one basket, and it still doesn't get landed. So that can just be triggered.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner, and thanks, Peter. I think this is definitely something worth pursuing. It was a lot of discussions, as you well know, between us and the Washington County folks, and the obstacle was advocates on the other side who, were bound and determined to have a one-size-fits-all and didn't want to have any discussion of any modifications. And the problem was that we got up against the deadline, as you remember, and even if we convinced them to amend the bill, the bill might have died, and the Washington County people needed some immediate relief. So they got the immediate relief, but I did promise the Washington County folks that we were going to come back and have a discussion. So, one opportunity might be for us to get the Washington County folks on the phone from the staff level and chat with them about, what we're doing, what we're planning on moving forward. And AOC, of course, would be important to have on that call as well.
Well, one of my thoughts, maybe bring it up to a high level so we can think of it as, block diagram and keep it simple. So, then we can define the decision spaces for the legislative session. But yeah, it sounds like is there support to proceed in this? And as I said, I didn't follow it deeply during this legislative session. Wasn't on my radar. I don't know that we talked about it a lot here. We heard about it. Mostly at the very end here. Yeah.
Peter, Doug just mentioned coordination with folks in Washington County. I mean, you're in pretty close touch
Yeah.
already?
I am Commissioner Chang and did some pre-planning, have reached out to Washington County staff just to prepare for this conversation. So I forget Doug, you'll remember, Washington County has a government affairs liaison. That I think it makes a lot of sense to, just as you articulated, to reach out to Washington County. Rob Bovett was, I think, the attorney for Washington County that introduced House Bill 3197. It's an original form. And so having a conversation with Washington County to understand the trials and tribulations that they experienced during the regular session. And then I think it likely would entail a conversation that you might have or others with Dave Honeycutt, just to kind of gauge their temperature. I mean, there, just as you noted, there's a lot of interest in clear and objective housing standards from Dave Honeycutt's organization, from the builders associations and industries. And I just want to be clear, the Community Development Department is not in any way against clear and objective standards at all. We understand the importance of this now more than ever. It's the execution of this bill for Deschutes County that creates real challenges and complexities based on our, 25, 30-year implementation of Goal 5 and Goal 7 regulations. So,
So
Peter-
Department, I mean, this is a legislative idea that will allow to mature. I'm sure commissioners are on the same page.
Yes,
Okay.
I have some other
Yeah,
issues.
any other thoughts on that one?
This one I'm pretty frustrated with. I mean, I can understand clear and objective standards for cities, which is where we're supposed to be producing most of the housing that we produce in Oregon anyway. The proponents of this policy coming after counties, I really don't appreciate. And I would be interested in fighting that a little bit more aggressively, but I don't think we're gonna have agreement on that.
Well, we'll learn a little bit about it, right? Just mature the idea. Yeah, go ahead, Commissioner there.
Doug, so remember the children's mental health facilities? I think we were asking for 4 of them in the state. Is there any way is that going to be a possibility this time? It just seems like it's so needed. And we had asked for it in Central Oregon.
I was gonna similarly ask about Representative Sanchez. So we had discussed before how I had been in talks with St. Charles and a couple of our local state representatives about doing a tour of the emergency department at St. Charles. And the idea came up, well, maybe we could get Representative Sanchez to come over and take a look. So, if October is our best shot at doing that, but really it would be better to look at next spring. Would it be a good idea to still try to do that tour this fall and just do it for our local people?
Yeah, commissioners, good questions, and something that's been first and foremost on my mind. In fact, this morning I met with a Ways and Means member from Oregon City, and I chatted with her just about that same bill, House Bill 3126, and asked her to raise that with Chair Sanchez. I'm also meeting with Chair Sanchez and a group of legislators here in about 2 weeks to talk about this very same issue. And so I'm going to ask, my plan is to invite Chair Sanchez to come over at that meeting. So give her a personal invitation, and I'll let you know what she says. But I think that's another one of those leave behinds or left behinds that I mentioned earlier. And that was a little bit baffling. What the bill cost $11 million, but I would argue that what it would save in improved outcomes for children and lower costs for hospital ERs and lower stress and pressure on the on the staff and ERs that have to deal with these children, and they are not trained to address the needs of these youth. So it really surprised me that it didn't pass, and I'm hoping that that will be something that comes up in February. So Commissioner Chang, I think that getting her over here before the short session would be a good move, and I'll push on that pretty hard.
And if that did happen, would sometime in October be a good time to target?
Whatever, I'd say, whatever works on her calendar, we should try to coordinate with St. Charles and make that happen. So I think October is a good time because it's after the interim hearings they're having. So legislators might have a little additional time, but I haven't chatted with her staff of what her calendar availability might be yet.
We do have flights now between Redmond and Portland. So I believe they are reappearing. So that might be a little bit helpful, saving maybe an hour of time or something. And then Doug, I want to know, how do we get the state insurance plan to be better than it is? Just in case we have more insurance companies that start pulling out, how do we?
Homeowners.
Yeah. Yes, homeowners
Ooh.
insurance.
Good question, and not something I have spent much time on. So I'll have to do a little digging and chat with staff and get back to you on that. But I've heard rumors and rumblings about that, but not something I worked on extensively.
Okay, I mentioned it earlier to a couple of the representatives, and I just think it's really important. And then I did have a conversation today with Representative Mark Owens, and I know he's continuing to work on water. And apparently there is like 1.5 million out there for wells, but it's through a state fund, and local people are to get a hold of Jeremy Giffen, our water master, but Mark said he is more than happy to facilitate anyone that needs some assistance. He said to copy him on the email along with Rep Levy and Rep Crop. So I'm hoping that funding is going to happen again. 2 years ago, we were actually given direct funding of $585,000 for Deschutes County that came through, and Neighbor Impact got that out, and that seemed to be maybe a bit easier. I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I'm sure those 14 homeowners in La Pine would really appreciate some help right now.
Yeah, a good point. And I heard about a week ago that there will be a legislative visit on water and potentially coming to Central Oregon. I'm trying to confirm the details, and I'll let you know times and dates. And that might be a good opportunity to raise that issue with them if they're going to be in our neck of the woods.
Yeah, the water caucus.
Yep.
As they call themselves.
Yeah, keep an eye on that. But they should just start off with that. Juvenile,
The juvenile, yes.
did you finish that?
Right, no, and then the state insurance, and then the other thing, of course, is the Juniper bill that got cut back. I don't know if anybody would adopt it, but I do feel that that's incredibly important. And I know the biomass probably needs more money than they want to allocate, but it kind of goes together.
Yeah, in conversations we've had since the session, there's some very good opportunities to leverage the $2.6 million that the state provided for those targeted natural resource and water areas. And so we're working on that. And then as far as the biomass tax credit, looks like what the Revenue Committee is telling the folks in Central Oregon and Crook County in particular is that they probably won't do any more tax credits in 2024, but they will come back with potential tax credit expansion in 2025. That seems to actually fit with the construction timeline for the renewable energy plant project that they're talking about. So I think they're going to ask for some design funding to complete the design and then be ready. So that would line up a little more carefully with the tax credit going into effect when there's actually a plant up and running that could use the biomass.
Great. Anything else?
Thank you.
You brought?
I I think housing and homelessness issues are going to continue to be a high priority for the region. And this housing infrastructure funding, even though it would probably be targeted inside incorporated cities, that's something I would like to see the county helping to advocate for. And you know, certainly we've had a lot of discussions recently with the state, with the governor's office about homelessness issues. One of the things that it would be really nice to get out of the state would be funding support for shelter that is not indoor shelter. You know, the governor's emergency order was really focused on indoor shelter opportunities and to have a complete continuum of places for people to go, and just to have enough authorized, planned, supported places for people to go. We're going to have some outdoor shelter here.
Yeah, I think Commissioner Chang, I think that is an area that you're exactly right. I think a lot of people agree there's a need for some additional focus and investment, and some things were funded in House Bill 2001. For instance, $20 million for homeless youth, and JBAR-J will probably benefit in Central Oregon in particular from some of that funding. But there were other areas that, you know, that's a down payment or a first year of a multi-year effort. And certainly there are some creative and innovative ways to deal with the homeless issue that I think the legislature could explore in the future.
And you know, you said department heads, so is there some starting points here?
Just a few things. We tracked in the last session a bill that would exempt bonuses from pay equity considerations. And so I think there's an interest in continuing to track that topic if it does reemerge in the short session. Community Justice flagged that they'll continue to monitor grant and aid community corrections funding along with the Oregon Association of Community Corrections Directors. I think they're unclear on kind of what the statewide approach to that will be, but obviously monitoring it closely. And then just tracking a few recent requests that have come in from external entities in the past few months. I think potential support for the state medical examiner's office was something that you had mentioned a while back, as well as the Terrebonne Sanitary District funding request in their most recent presentation to the board. So those are just a few things that staff has flagged for the board's awareness.
So Doug, I don't know if we talked about medical examiner capacity. We had a good work session with the folks that are providing these services on contract for Deschutes County. And they say that, you know, it's growing, it's overwhelming, they're trying to keep up with it. You know, they're trying to contract with the county. We're a population based, the Tri-County area that probably fits into a funding model the state intended on triggering. You know, like after 250,000 in an area, they wanted to be able to step in and provide some resources at the state. But that doesn't look like that's on the horizon. And then also the medical examiner representative mentioned that the state needs a lot more resources. They're getting backed up very far right now too. So I don't know if we've talked about that in the past, but if you cross paths with whoever may be having that topic, Central Oregon and Deschutes County is getting to be an interesting, it's almost ready to boil over, just being able to manage the capacity.
It's taking a year, Doug, for the toxicology reports to be given out, over a year. The state office is incredibly underfunded. They don't offer enough pay, and there's I believe like 10 empty positions. Something needs to be done, and is it the legislature that's going to look at that?
So let's say we can be an advocate.
Yeah, haven't spent much time on this issue, but certainly we'll dive into it, and I'll talk with staff and we'll get some answers.
Well, just figure out where the conversation's being had. It's another one of those things. It's a kind of a foundational thing, you know, a TA's office. If there's a questionable death, you know, let's get it processed instead of just putting it in the queue and not knowing when it's going to come back. So just any of that. So, is there anybody else or any other topics?
point, hopefully, so.
Yeah, so good to see you. Let's look for those opportunities to work together. If water caucus is coming through or any legislators for any topics, it'd be good to be able to host them here. This fall, or I really like the idea of having that summit in the spring. So that would be after the short session, obviously, that
Correct. Yep.
that's the only downside to that, but
So what are the dates of the actual short session then? Do we have those? I know you said February.
Yeah,
35 days.
they will do preliminary hearings in January, in the second and third week of January. So they'll introduce bills and hold initial hearings on bill concepts in January. That is kind of a new thing. It used to be that they would wait until the beginning of the short session and do all the initial hearings then. And by taking the hearings and getting the witnesses out of the way for some of the bills in January, then they can hit the ground running in February. So it'll be that first week of February. So the first Tuesday in February. It's a 35-day session, although they haven't yet gone the full 35 days. They typically get out 5 or 6 days early. It's a very fast timeline. A bill, if there's a House bill, for instance, that House bill must pass out of its first committee in the first 8 days of the session. So by Thursday of the second week, that bill has to be out of that committee. And then it goes to the floor, then the Senate, and they've got 8 days to get the bill out of the Senate committees if it needs to go there, or out of Ways and Means. And then the last 14 days are reserved for floor action on bills that have come from both sides. So it's really a quick turnaround. And we honestly don't know what the status and the state of the Capitol is going to be. They closed down the building the day after the session ended in June. So that Monday morning, all the hallways and the hearing rooms are closed, and they're working to jack up that part of the building. And so no one really knows, will there be much of a building for us? I mean, conceivably, they could. I wish they would move it. Put the short session into the convention center in Salem or out of the state fairgrounds. But they seem bound and determined to just use the existing Capitol.
yeah, well, we could offer our fairgrounds too, maybe if they want to come somewhere else.
I would love that.
Yeah.
Spend 35 days in Redmond. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Good to see you. Maybe we'll cross paths in person here in the near future.
Sure we will. Yeah. Good to see all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug.
Okay, next item is Treasury report. This is for July, end of the fiscal year. For joining.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. For the record, Bill Coons, Sheets County Treasurer, and I'm pleased to present the July Treasurer's Report. As I usually kind of lead off with, I'll go through kind of a high-level overview of economic conditions that have occurred over the last month. Probably the most notable news occurred on August 1st when Fitch Ratings downgraded the U.S. government's credit rating from previously AAA rating to AA+. And this was done based on the rating agency's view of the large U.S. government deficit and the standoff earlier this year between the president and House Republicans over suspending the debt ceiling limit to allow the federal government, to continue to issue debt and meet its obligations. There were a couple of factors that played into this. They cited several issues that contributed to this action, including general erosion of governance, a rising U.S. debt burden, and increasing issuance of U.S. government debt to fund ongoing operations. So this has been kind of a reoccurring theme for a while now. And it also should be noted that back in 2011, another rating agency, Standard & Poor's, also cut their rating on U.S. debt to basically the same reasons, including what they referred to at that time as dysfunctional governance. And that's quote unquote. With this backdrop, U.S. government issuances continue to increase as the Treasury rebuilds its balance sheet. With the debt standoff, they basically ran their balance sheet down, and they're in the midst of considerable issuance of US government debt over the last 30 days or so. So we've seen a huge influx of debt coming onto the market with treasury auctions. Obviously, the cost of issuing that debt is considerably higher than it was a year ago, and this will also place an added burden on the federal budget. As I previously mentioned, the three big risks to the economy at this time are focused on China, which raised its ugly head last week. Considerable focus right now on what appears to be a significant slowdown in China and their economy. And also the US banking sector and commercial real estate are probably the big three right now that economists are certainly keeping an eye on. Secondarily, we've talked a lot about the US banking sector over the last couple of months. And this was brought about by the rapid increase in interest rates since early 2022. Earlier this month in August, Moody's downgraded the credit rating for 10 mid-sized US banks and may look at a much broader sampling of over 70 US banks for potential downgrades. There remains considerable pressure on banks with eroding gross margins due to higher interest costs, declining spreads on their lending activity, and concerns over capital adequacy and diminished access to credit by borrowers. So all that's kind of coming to a forefront right now.
So those declining spreads or the spreads of the bonds that are purchased, the bonds that they can sell, we're in that same spot. Is there like a time frame where that kind of gets washed out or not? I mean, is that like a known 2-year window or is it still just?
The
spread?
forecast, longer term forecast is still for declining rates, but not happening until probably 12 months or so out before we start to see a trend of declining long-term rates. But we are still very much in an inverted yield curve right now, where the 2-year treasury is considerably higher than the 10-year treasury. We actually have the widest spreads right now that we've seen in the last 20 years. And it's usually it's a precursor to a recession, but that hasn't happened. We had a little bit of a discussion last month about some of the reasons why. But short-term borrowing rates are still considerably higher than long-term rates. So
Which really puts the squeeze on a financial institution.
it absolutely does. Yeah, and that's what they're
Is there a
figuring out.
horizon to that, I guess, is that, or is it unknown still?
It's fairly unknown right now as to when that may turn. But really, I think it. I guess the comment I would make is the 2-year treasury rate is a managed rate that's driven more by what's happening with the Fed and what they're doing with short-term borrowing rates. So it's a rate that isn't a true indicator of cost of funds, but more a reflection of what's currently happening with short-term borrowing rates. And the 10-year rate is more of an indication of what longer-term true borrowing costs are. So I think that's what we're seeing right now with the big run up in the Fed, which, we've seen an increase of over 500 basis points, 5 full percentage points since this first round of tightening started back in early 2022. And again, so, that outlook on banks right now and potential credit, I've actually heard from a number of my banking sources over the last 30 days that that's real. It's happening. Tighter credit standards and certainly less credit available because of concerns about capital adequacy. And the Fed has, through the FDIC, the regulatory agency, they have indicated that they will tighten up the regulatory standards that especially the kind of middle and larger banks need to adhere to. And that will obviously, I think, be a focal point for the next probably 6 months or so. Yeah, of kind of getting into that regulatory exam cycle. But again, I think just that diminished access to credit by borrowers and what impact that might have on both residential construction development borrowing. I know that access to capital for construction activities can be severely diminished.
From a global economic standpoint, I talked a little bit about this earlier about the Chinese economy, which appears to be faltering with significant erosion in several vital areas. According to Treasury Secretary Yellen, the mounting weakness in China is a risk factor for the U.S. economy due to the interwoven nature of the global economy. So, China sneezes and we catch the cold. That's kind of what happens there. But anyway, and that's also an area of significant concern right now. So while inflation has moved off its earlier highs, price pressure remains above the Federal Open Market Committee's target, with downward momentum painfully slow. And that's what we're seeing right now, is making incremental changes to inflationary index is becoming more difficult as we get closer to their target, but we're not there yet. And again, the core CPI last month remained at 3.2% annually, which is slightly above the 3% in June, and their target rate is 2%. And I think that's going to be fairly difficult to achieve with some of the other inflationary pressures remaining in rent, housing, and food prices, primarily those three areas. And then also with the seasonal uptick in energy costs expected this fall, I think forecasters are estimating that the CPI remains at 3.2% through year end. So for perspective, however, our CPI was at 9.1% in June of 2022. So we made significant progress, but from a Fed standpoint, we're not there. And certainly we saw that at the July meeting. They released the Fed meeting minutes last week, which indicated that the central bank officials were divided over the need for more interest rate hikes. Minutes show most policymakers continue to prioritize the battle against inflation over backing off on rates and allowing, kind of the impact from previous increases in interest to kind of be felt throughout the broader economy. And again, the next Fed meeting is scheduled for September 20th, and the latest inflation data appears to support a pause in September, but there have been some recent releases over the last few days that might put that in jeopardy. So I think most forecasters expect one more increase between now and the end of the year. But again, a lot of it depends on the strength of some of the consumer data in particular. Consumer spending has remained elevated. There's been some concern about how long that can be sustained. We're starting to see with the consumers a higher level of borrowings and hardship withdrawals on 401ks, et cetera. So it appears to be that consumer spending is being supported by things outside of just normal income. And a couple of other inflationary factors. July jobs report reported payroll growth at 187,000 for the month, which was lower than the 200,000 expected. But the overall unemployment rate remains unchanged at 3.5%, which is essentially full employment. And that's one of the biggest challenges we have right now. Is the Fed feels like with full employment already achieved that they don't need to be concerned about maintaining jobs. Supporting the resiliency of the economy, July PPI rose, which is a producer price index, rose 0.3% in July, which was more than the 0.2% rise expected. And it followed a flat reading the month prior to that. Year over year, producer prices rose 0.8% in July, which was slightly more than the 0.7% gain expected. Monthly housing data is mixed. While housing starts rose 3.9% in July, pulling the annual pace to 1.45 million for the year, building permits declined 13% in July. Overall construction activity has diminished over the last 2 years, and that's essentially what we're seeing nationwide. With continued upward pressure on long-term rates, the average 30-year mortgage rate rose to 7.16% last month, which matches the highest rate since 2001, dampening both sales and refinancing activity nationwide. So I guess the next question is, what impact is that having on the regional level? So the July Beacon report showed Ben's area median sales price setting another record at $800,000 for the month, which is the highest that we've seen in quite some time. And it also exceeded the price peak that we had previously seen back in, I think it was February, March of 2022. The median sales price is continuing to be impacted by higher end $1 million plus home sales. Of 141 sales in July, 46 of these sales, or 32%, were above $1 million for the Bend market. And also 40 of these sales were cash transactions. So again, we see trends of higher mix of $1 million plus home sales, and also a large number of those being cash transactions, which aren't being impacted by the large increase in mortgage rates. Let's see, there's currently a 2-month supply of homes currently listed. And I found this one interesting, is that there were only a 9-day listing period for sold properties. So the properties that are being sold are moving quickly. So that inventory is not standing. Bend area single family building permits dropped significantly to only 28 for the month, which I think we're probably also seeing here at Deschutes County.
Was it a drop from last month? What, do you know what it was a year ago? Bill?
I don't know if I have that information available.
I mean, you said it was a significant drop. I'm just wondering.
Well,
what-
month over month.
Right.
It was a significant month over month. Yeah, the previous month for Bend was around 40.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a fairly significant drop. Yeah. The Redmond statistics show a median sales price of $500,000 for the month, which was up from the prior month, but down still from $542,000 peak in August of 2022. And they also currently have a 2-month inventory supply. Redmond area permits were 23 for the month, which declined from a yearly high of 35, which was achieved in May. The most sales in the Redmond area were in the $400,000 to $500,000 price point, which I've indicated before seems to define affordable housing here for Central Oregon, primarily Deschutes County. I know you've asked previously about what other markets are doing. Sisters Market, the median sales price was $685,000 for the month. Sun River was $980,000 for the month, and La Pine was $430,000 for the month. Again, the elevated long-term rate environment has certainly had an impact on home sales and also new construction. So any questions on the economic forecast?
No, but thank you for having that scope, because I hear some of those numbers throughout the month, but it's good to hear.
Yeah,
them
no.
together at a point in time.
For the July Treasurers Report, the portfolio balance was $258 million at month end, which was a decrease of $15.5 million from June, and a decrease year over year of $9.9 million over a like period of 2022. Net investment earnings were $516,000 for the month, which was $346,000 more than last month. But again, please remember that last month's investment earnings were impacted by the book loss that we reported on investment sales for the month when we liquidated roughly $10 million in investment holdings, generated a book loss, but turned around and reinvested those holdings at a much higher rate. And $323,000 higher than a year ago, which again is reflective of higher rate environment and also the overall growth in the portfolio. All portfolio category balances are well within policy guidelines. From a rate perspective, the LGIP rate was 4.3% at month end, but we were notified from the Oregon Treasury that they did increase the LGIP rate to 4.5%, which was effective August 14th. And we kind of expected to see upward rate pressure on the LGIP rate just because of what's happening in the short-term investment arena. So again, that rate has seen a considerable increase, which has matched the rate on the borrowing side of things. The average portfolio yield was 2.38%, which continues to increase over the prior month. And again, as a reminder, we're now calculating this yield on a weighted average basis. The portfolio has a weighted average time to maturity of 1.12 years, which is slightly shorter than the prior month. And again, this is the function of the greater balances kept in short-term funds, both our banking relationship and also LGIP funding. And the short portfolio duration gives the county kind of maximum flexibility in this period of rate volatility. It's not likely that we'll see a lengthening of maturity duration until we enter our seasonal investing cycle into mid to late October. So as we start to get back into our cash flow influx with property tax revenues, then we'll be able to start taking better advantage of a longer portion of the yield curve. And that certainly will be a focus to it. We'll get into our investing cycle this fall. Any questions regarding this report?
So that portfolio balance at 9.9 million, less than last year, 22, that's kind of the first time. Don't see that too often where it's less than, I mean, because we've always been growing.
Yeah, I think we're starting to
Maybe
see a
ARPA.
function of ARPA funds, certainly.
So it wasn't even our money, I mean. it wasn't
Yeah,
our-
exactly.
our local
Kind of an
revenue.
inflow outflow
Yeah.
scenario. But Robert, certainly if he might be able to provide further insight into that. But in terms of kind of where I thought we were standing a year ago is that we certainly were impacted by the large influx of ARPA funds that we saw in 2021. And quite a few of those funds are being distributed out now, as they should have been. So.
Bill, you were just talking about how when tax revenues come in November, it'll give us an opportunity to make investments and take advantage of higher yield opportunities. So I look at like our 24-month, this chart in this package, and that LGIP, the 2-year treasury rate, it wasn't that long ago when they were kind of right at the same level where our county rate was.
Yeah, and that's
Now our county rate is falling behind.
yeah.
So will November be sort of like, in November, will we suddenly be able to get into things that,
Yeah,
are yield-
and again, it's a function of our portfolio makeup and the fact that we did a lot of investing when rates were near zero or close to it. So we were reaching for yield to achieve the highest yield that we could at the time, but those rates were so low compared to where we are today. And again, we do not typically sell investments before maturity and then go back and reinvest those because of the book loss issue that, again, a couple of months ago, we were kind of strategic around identifying some investments that were significantly low yielding, and we felt like we could justify taking on that book loss, but being able to reinvest those funds at a much higher yield, and also more importantly, increasing our short-term liquidity. So that was a two-pronged approach at that time. We do, because of our the short duration that we currently have in our portfolio, we're going to have considerable opportunity to, as those investments mature, we'll be able to go out and reinvest at a much higher yield than where we are today. I was privy to a PFM conference, one-day conference in Portland on Friday, and I was able to talk to some folks from PFM, and our portfolio is all other municipalities are dealing with the same issue right now. Yeah. It's just a function of how quickly rates increase, and we need to allow the existing investments to roll off where we have an opportunity to reinvest at a much higher yield. So good question. We're starting to see those rates, the average portfolio yield go up, but again, we're hamstrung by some of the investments that we currently have in our portfolio.
Well, this is exactly that first question I had, when's the horizon for financial sector? I can see a bank's problem is their only product is borrowing or taking in money. And this is the issue, they can't, if they have some long-term investments with the corpus, the money they have. Yeah.
there's more embedded risk out there in the financial sector right now that if other banks had to liquidate their investment portfolio, their hold to maturity investment portfolio to generate liquidity to cover distributions, basically customer withdrawals, that's where the issues came to the forefront with Silicon Valley Bank, First Republic, and others, where they were caught. They invested long and they had short-term liquidity issues that needed to be addressed.
Great, thanks.
So you're not going to Jackson Hole this Friday then?
Yeah, stay tuned. The market's already trying to read what that communication might be after 3 days in Jackson Hole. I think Jerome Powell's scheduled to make some comments on Friday. So,
Well, and yeah, we just all did email, but yeah, this guy Ian Carmen is from the Federal Reserve Bank in San Francisco. I was able to have a lunch with him and we talked about this year, but a little bit of email went back and forth. Robert was able to explain that, yeah, right now as we're planning on borrowing, it's gonna hurt, So, but it was good to be able to feed that back to them. And it sounds like you've had some experience kind of in this domain a little bit, the Federal Reserve Bank. people.
yeah, no, I absolutely have.
Basically, he just wanted to hear us talking. You know?
It was interesting, the comments that they wanted to have answered, the questions they wanted to have answered. I typically would do that annually in my former role in banking, provide those updates because they're typically looking at those sectors in the economy to gauge, kind of the impact, what's happening out there on Wall Street or on Main Street, actually, and not that it necessarily has a huge impact on what they intend to do with regards to rates to manage inflation,
Which is
but they
good
want to,
firsthand
it's cause and effect.
Yep.
Want to know what's happening. So anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Next is our finance report from July. So this is all the numbers.
Hey, good afternoon, commissioners. For the record, Robert Tintle, Chief Financial Officer. And yeah, just following up a little bit from the treasurer report on the cash flow. As Mr. Kuhn mentioned, we received more cash in with the ARPA funds, $38 million. Also the Negus bond, when we went out for that bond, that cash came in. And now we're in the cycle of spending down those funds. So we will continue to see our cash funds go back to a regular or lower until we get a new bond, for the courthouse. We'll receive that money in and then we'll spend it down. And then also the $15 million from the state, we'll receive that money in. So we'll see the up and down of our portfolio, but we will see it go down pending, other large, investments where we get the cash up front and then we spend it as we go down. So before what you have in front of you should be in the packet, the financial report for July, as you mentioned. This is the first month of the brand new fiscal year. So there's not a lot of activity and trend history that I'll be going over. So I'll just be highlighting a few different areas for you. Won't go through every report overall in detail. And then we do have some guests with us today from CDD. And so when we get to the CDD fund, I'll actually ask them to come up and then they'll share a little more detailed about what their division's doing and how they're seeing it, kind of talking about the forecast and not necessarily just focused on July, but it's a great opportunity for a broader conversation on their department. First here, page 15 in your package, just a dashboard of the general fund summary. Revenues year to date in the general fund are $683,000 or 1.5% of budget. Last year to date, it was $858,000 or 2% of budget. And expenses year to date are $3.6 million. Last year at this time, they were $3.3 million. And again, the dashboard is there for the comparison. We'll talk about the general fund a little bit more in a minute. The next page is the FTE position control summary, page 16 in your packet. So this has a little more activity this month because of the brand new fiscal year. So when I look at our positions, total positions, it increased over last fiscal year. Last fiscal year, we ended at 1,232.51. Right now, this report totals 1244.76. That's a difference of 12.25 positions were added. Some of the major positions, as you may recall from the budget meetings, the sheriff's office added 6 positions this fiscal year. And that was for 2 detectives, 3 field techs, and a management analyst. And then another big one was solid waste with 11 positions, again, with their new requirements, the new funding, they're expecting to come in as well. And their positions, it was 3 equipment operators, 4 site attendants, 2 customer service positions, a contracts position, and public engagement. That's with all the new initiatives that they have going.
So they've added 11. You're saying?
Yes, the new fiscal year added 11. Yep. Fair and Expo added 4 positions during the budget process as well. You may recall that was for 2 maintenance specialist ones, an admin analyst, and a sales and marketing position. ISF facilities added 1.75 positions as well. Finance, thank you, added 1 position as well for procurement. And then we did CDD through the process. I'll talk a little bit about that. They reduced by 6 positions from last fiscal year to this fiscal year. And then there were some other little minor changes, but those were the big. So a lot of position changes for July. Again, it's the first month of the new fiscal year, and all the results of the budget decisions that occurred and the approved and adopted budget reflect these numbers here.
Robert, did you just say there was a net increase of 12 positions?
There is, and this report, so it's minus the 6 for CDD, and health services right now, good point, is also showing a negative 6 right now, but they actually reduced 5, but they transitioned a lot from limited duration to regular positions, and that was 13, I think it was 13.5. So, and timing with the report of the position where these, how it's reported by next month, we'll see where these all land. But yeah, so there are a number of increases, large increases, and then some, it kind of nets somewhat in health services as well. Hey, page 17 in your packet, just a high overview of all funds. Just a reminder, at the top of the page, top right, July is 1 month, so it's 8.3% of the fiscal year. So if you just averaged everything out, you'd think our revenues would be at 8%, 8.3, and our expenditures would be 8.3. But we know revenues and expenditures don't always just behave evenly throughout the month. But so far, year to date, total resources, it's 5% of our revenues have come in so far, a little under. We'll talk about that. And the next page, page 18, just
It was actually, I used to do that, and Greg Mudd actually added that to the financial reporting. I used to do it myself because I thought it was a really, at least it gives you a reference point.
yeah, it's just a high level, frame. Expenditures are also at 5%. So our revenues are 5, our expenditures, which is the total requirements on page 18. They're the percent in the middle columns there, 5%.
And we've seen some purchasing and contracting activity that got triggered too, that probably hasn't come in yet.
Absolutely.
We booked here pretty soon.
Yeah, yep. So page 21 for the general fund, detail again, 8.3 a month. But if you look at the revenues just for the general fund, it's just at 2%, as we know, like we just talked about. The top line there, property taxes current. We don't receive property taxes starting coming into October, November, so we won't even have, we have 0% as of now. That's what makes it seem like a lower percentage. And our expenditures, our total requirements are 8% at this point in time. We'll go to page 22 on juvenile fund 030. Not a lot of activity on their account. I just want to point out one thing that may look like an anomaly on their revenues. It has a negative $12,000 for their DOC unit crime fee. That is actually just a timing issue. There's some revenues that came in that relate to last fiscal year. So we do the accrual process. So we accrued that revenue back, but the actual posting for the revenue posted on August 2nd, and yet this accrual occurred July 1st, first day of fiscal year. So it's just a timing. So they really do have about $12,000 in revenue. Just that one line timing issue with the accrual shows it as negative. The next page, page 23 for TRP funds. I do want to point out a couple things on here, and you might have seen Judy Haas sends out the monthly report on our taxes. So the room tax revenue for the first month, July, again, revenues are delayed by 1 month. It's at 1.465 million. revenue that came in. That is 4.7% lower than what we budgeted if we average out the months. And year to date from last year, it was down 4.9% from last year. Last year at this time, it was $1.5 million, and now we're at about almost 1.5, but it was a difference of 74,756 decrease from last year. However, if you look 2 years ago, it was up, our current revenue is up 43,000 from 2 years ago. You may recall that we did base our budget, the total of 12.6 12.6 million in room tax revenue. It is closer based to that fiscal year 22 number, not fiscal year 23. It's just we're coming in lower at this time than what we thought. Typically, as you know, July through October are our higher months for receiving TRT revenue in. So being one of the higher months, it's down. We have a long ways to go, but we'll have to closely monitor these funds.
Being smoked out for a whole week in August, it's probably not gonna help a whole lot for.
That's exactly right. And we knew those were the variables when we are trying to budget for TRT. As you know, some of the other entities came in and said they were a little more proactive in what their budget was than what we were. And we were still sticking with the last few months reclining in the last fiscal year. And then still questioned on, are we still budgeting too high? And we won't know that until we go through it.
Yeah, I just heard the story of someone getting a room for half price because of the smoke.
Oh. Well, a good deal for them.
Yeah, I know.
You will notice on the requirements line, I do want to point out grants and contributions, $3 million expenditure. So the good news is we out of these funds, as you know, the board committed $2 million went to Mount Bachelor. Excuse me. $2 million went to Sun River, $1 million went to Mount Bachelor. So we did pay those out. So the only thing remaining of our current commitments is the final payment from
Sun
River. I don't know why I got Mount Bachelor on my brain here. The final payment for Sun River of $2 million, which would be next fiscal year. And that's as you see, if you go all the way down to our projection at end of the year, we're assuming revenues are the same. We assume the projection will be 1.999 at this point, essentially $2 million, which again is the payment that goes to there. One last thing to point out. In the middle of transfers, you see transfer out general county reserve, 723,000. That's what we budgeted for excess in this fund that we transfer out to the general county reserve. And then that fund ends up helping support general fund projects, commissioner requests, and it goes building funds. You know, it's the reserve that we use it for multiple things. But even with our last year, 23 came in lower than we thought. So we know this is really about 500,000 right now. But then anytime if our month's revenue goes below, we may not be able to make that transfer. Then as we look at our long-term forecast that always counts on these funds, that's why we monitor this fund as well in this transfer, because it impacts other things in the general fund. So any questions on TRT? Other questions? No. Okay, ARPA Fund 200 on page 24. Just want to point out a couple things on that. On the revenue resources at the top, local assistance travel consistency funds. It shows there the budget in the middle column here of 2.3 million. Thank you, Commissioner Chang helped us make sure we applied for, we had to apply for the second tranche of funds. And these funds, as you might recall from budget committee meetings as well, are dedicated to be transferred to the courthouse project to fund the courthouse, contribute to that. We haven't received the second payment in yet, but we do anticipate we will be receiving that in. Just a little highlight, and we will be talking a lot more about ARPA on Wednesday, so we'll have a full conversation there. In general terms, you know, the total ARPA funds we received was $38.4 million. In fiscal year 22, we expended about 14 million. And in fiscal year 23, another 14 million, and you'll see that number there. So there's about $10 million we still have to expend. So, and again, we'll highlight this on Wednesday, but we have done a lot of great work in the community through these ARPA funds, and about 28 million has already gone out the door. So a lot of great work there. Next, page 26 in your packet is the Sheriff's Office Fund 255. Only thing to, again, highlight there, you'll notice our revenues are at 1%, yet we're at 0.3% of the fiscal year. Top two lines of the resources are the property taxes for both our service districts. Obviously, that revenue will come in November. So we'll see that with August as well, September. The revenue won't be coming in, but they are having their expenditures. Health services, page 27, fund 274. This overall for their funds, their resources thus far this year are at 4%, the revenue coming in, and their expenditures are at 5%. So far. I should also mention a lot of the revenues or expenses that come in as they're coming in July. If the revenue and we get a payment in that still relates to last fiscal year, we accrue back that revenue to put it to last fiscal year. And if there's expenses that relate to last fiscal year, we'll charge that to last fiscal year as well. So sometimes July, you won't see all of the revenue, all of the expenses that come in. Going to flip to, actually, I'm going to skip community development and we'll leave them for the end. So we'll come back to those pages. So I'm going to go forward a few other pages. Page 33, parole and probation. Just one thing you may notice on there is their total resources year to date are 22%. So way higher than the 8.3 you might expect. Again, their biggest revenue that's in so far is their DOC grant aid, Senate Bill 1145. They receive a quarterly payments. And so they got their first quarterly payment in July, therefore it's a higher percent just for that one funding source. And that was just their 1 quarter payment. Obviously, they'll get 3 more payments after that. So the revenues are just higher than you would expect. Going through the packet, page 38, annual county fair. Nothing to report here. I'm not going to report on the fair today. As you know, well, the fair occurred in August anyway, and this report is as of July, even though they do have projections in this report. But really, for this, expenses for the fair usually take 90 to 120 days before all the expenses come in and all the bills get paid before we know those results. And Jeff will be having a joint meeting usually with the Fair Board and the Board of County Commissioners anywhere where they'll go over the details there. So I'm not going to steal his thunder, but we do know, and there was an article in the paper that it was a good fair this year as well. Page 43 in your packets, risk management, Fund 670. Again, I'm only trying to point out a few things that stick out here. Their total requirements or expenses year to date are at 19%. So they spent $900,000 of their $4.7 million expense budget so far this year, with 10% of the revenues coming in. Again, as Eric would mention, and he mentions often, they're sporadic and it can be a higher claim this month, less next month. So we'll just watch that, but it's not alarming at this point. It's just how our expenses are coming in. Health Benefits Fund 675, this will be the last fund before we talk about CDD, and it's on page 44 in your packet. You'll see the expenditures are only at 1% here, the total requirements are 1%. And again, this gets back to relating. We still have expenses coming in for July and August, but those bills that come in relate to service that's performed as of June. So we are still accruing back the bills that we get in and posting those back to June of fiscal year 23. So these small amounts that you have here are actually for claims that were incurred and paid that relate back to August, or sorry, back to July. So even in August, when we get bills from the health insurance providers, their August bill, a lot of those claims still relate back to June. So we post that back to those expenditures. And usually it's the first 60 days where we're looking at revenues or expenses, because our budget's based on current financial resources that we accrue those back. So you'll see those in it.
And those internal premium charges from 19.9 to 25.9 million. So that's a big commitment to raise those rates.
Yes, we did. And we've talked, as you know, we've talked about the health of this fund. So we'll be obviously monitoring that throughout the year as well. Before we get to CDD, any other questions?
I did have a question about our RV parking at the fair. Is there any way we can rent to people that at a lower rate, if their income is qualified, let's say 60% of AMI or something? Is there any way we can, because I know we're not full, is there any way we can help people out?
I think that would be a great question directed to Jeff. Yeah,
Okay.
and when you meet with them, I wouldn't want to speak to lowering or adjusting his rates without that, but yeah, that would be something to look into. Obviously, I know we have published rates, but if there's anything they can do with that.
I know, Bill's on the board, so it's.
Yeah.
Somebody just brought it up to me and I know that because we have that competition factor now, if there is a way we can help people legally that need a little help.
I'm happy to follow up with Jeff on that question, Commissioner, and I do know just anecdotally that there are times for certain events that Fair and Expo is renting out that entire park as part of an event package, and so I think that's a component for consideration as well, but I'm happy to follow up with Jeff and we can get back to you.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, we're gonna have that joint meeting scheduled this fall,
Oh, good.
and I don't know if the date's been finalized yet. I know they've been talking about a couple of dates, but that'd be a great discussion on in there. In a joint meeting with Board of County Commissioners.
And it's typically should be the end of August, first part of November, I think is what they're looking at for schedule.
End of October.
Yeah, first of November.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
I think the value is being able to turn that campground over, as in, when there is an event and it gets sold out, there's many spots are available as possible. So that'll be an interesting discussion.
There is the winter though. I mean, it's not so full, so all the time in winter. So I mean, this is, there could be discussions about doing something for the winter months. So, yeah, my question was about, so going back to the health benefits fund. So 1 month is 8.3% of the year. The internal premium charges is 6% of what we would collect for the, you know, what we're budgeting for the year. I mean, shouldn't that be about 8.3%?
One thing with the first payroll of July, now, this is the first year, includes 8 days or 9 days of June, because our pay period's June 22nd to July 21st. So we did accrue back the 22nd through the 30th of expenses and the related revenue as well for these funds. So that about 30% there of that cost got associated. If the revenue or expenditures relate to last fiscal year, then we accrue those back to last fiscal year. So we will see there. So it's kind of like payroll will have, if say there's 4 weeks of a payroll, even though it's 4.33, 4 weeks. July you'll see 3 weeks posted of actual expense because that 1 week we accrue back to June. But then we make it up when we get down to June of this year, the end of the year. Well, actually, it looks like we'll have 5 weeks posted because we accrue that 1 week back. So it's a catch up. That would be good catch as well.
Yeah, because a couple percent of 25.9 million is something.
And right, no, it is. And that's it. And why we are very much looking at this fund and why we raised the rates to the departments as well, because we need to make sure our revenues are coming in and our expenditures. So now I'm going to go back to page 32 in your packet for fund. Oh, wait, no, that's not right. Page 31, Community Development Fund 295. And with that, Peter.
So, we talked about this, setting up the agenda, let's have a discussion about, the structure of how money flows is one of my thoughts. Because if we're seeing the slowdown of building permits, how does it kind of propagate through the planning and long-term planning also?
Do you want to start?
Thanks for joining us.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, so we're looking at July financials, but in a slowing environment, what does that mean?
I mean, I'm happy to provide an overview. Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director, Sherry Pinner, Management Analyst, are typically July, August, April, May, June. Those are our big months for development activity. And what we're seeing, just to give you an overview and then get to your question about how building activity really impacts all of our divisions. Last year, as Robert noted, we did not fill 6 positions. We were very grateful to have that opportunity to examine our revenue in relationship to our operational need. And as we saw budgetary volatility, we
we didn't fill those positions, knowing we kept some open. We still haven't been able to fill externally a commercial plans examiner. And what we would characterize, I think we've started to see some budget uncertainty last fiscal year. We were able to weather it because of those unfilled positions. We also had, and Sherry can get into greater detail about this, over the last year or two, we saw some unprecedented commercial building activity. And the valuation on commercial building activity for permits is significant. And to your question to the chair, the way we structure our building permits, and again, Sherry can get into the details, is as building activity, when it's robust, it's funding code compliance, it's funding coordinated services, it's providing counter fees, it's providing some funding for long range planning. And what we've seen is we're not experiencing a lot of commercial activity. That's number one. Number two, we're not seeing a lot of what we would typically, that's such a word, over the last several years, kind of steady single family dwelling activity. Our land use activity in July and the first couple of weeks of August has been really soft. We did see a surge in June as people, knew the fees were increasing. That always happens. We have a number of plan amendment zone changes that came in. So June was quite robust. And so I'm not at all suggesting that we don't have work that needs to be done, inspections and land use reviews and code compliance. But I would say those factors in general, again, relying on my management analyst, those are an undercurrent that is giving us pause. We have 3 unfilled positions right now. An assistant building official, a commercial plans examiner, and an associate planner. We're not going to be filling those positions, at least not eminently, to manage this kind of budgetary circumstance. We're hopeful that we get in August in a bang, but the last 3 weeks have been surprisingly soft in terms of thinking about land use applications, the complexity, and then the building activity. We're kind of finding ourselves in 2014, 2015, 2016 volumes. And then we have reserve funds, which we are grateful that they're established. The building division funds 301, 302 are quite significant, several $1 million. 302 is the electrical, so the building division has approximately $7 million, which is a wonderful cushion, knowing that it takes so long to train building inspectors and plans examiners. The fund that the reserve fund that handles the rest of the department is significant, but it's not as robust. It's about just over 2.5 million. And we're just mindful of making sure that we don't rely extensively on Fund 300. And so Sherry's monitoring the budget regularly, and it's just something that we need to be cognizant of. And it's hard right now, it's difficult to extrapolate. I think we'll have a better sense of giving you kind of some burn rates of what the funds mean at the end of the month. But it's enough to give us pause, knowing that this development activity were to continue. We have concerns about how do you maintain our operational integrity? How do you ensure that some of our critical, so many of our colleagues throughout the divisions, it takes several years to get them trained to provide the service that our community expects. So we're trying to take that all under consideration while at the same time being fiscally prudent, looking at our operational needs and making sure that we're living within our budget. So that's my 30,000-foot perspective with the management analyst who can provide tremendous detail if you're interested.
Is there anything in particular? Well, so this is the acknowledgement that this is happening. I wonder what the city of Bend and city of Redmond numbers are for development at this point in time. I know there's a big UGB effort, so is there gonna be a difference between, you know, urban and rural at this point? Accessory dwelling units maybe on the horizon, we'll see where that goes. But this is a time of transition, whatever it is.
So what do the numbers look like this month then, Sherry?
So this is a very small data sample, right? So
It's through the
first
22nd.
right, the first, 45 or so days of this fiscal year compared to last fiscal year. Our single family dwelling permits issued are really trending right in alignment with each other, but our non-residential or commercial permits are way down, which is resulting in a 21% decrease for building valuations, which generate monies for building safety, code compliance, current planning, and long-range planning. We have our site evaluations, which typically indicate future development. Those have actually improved a bit this fiscal year. So I'm very hopeful about what that means as far as that relates and turning those into building permits. We have our single family dwelling applications submitted as a 30% decrease over last year. So that one concerns me. And then land use is trending right around, I think 20-something%, which they have for quite some time. But what we're experiencing now, many of you are aware of, is a decrease over a previous decrease. So over fiscal year 21, 22 is a decrease, and now I'm sorry, 22 to 23, 23 to 24, it's continually declining. You're well aware that we meet with our community partners on a monthly basis, and we're just not hearing anything on the development side or on the real estate side that is indicating a turnaround in developments. We do not, we certainly are aware of subdivisions being developed, and so there's just not a lot of that. Certainly ADUs could be an opportunity, but that might not be this fiscal year. That might end up being something that we experience a benefit from in fiscal year 25. So yeah, and I certainly do monitor these daily. So it's just part of one of my daily processes that I look at. What you're going to see on the July commissioner's report is an adjustment on the year-end projections on the revenue side for just three major divisions, and that is related to the building valuation decrease, because that's a little easier for me to calculate and estimate on what I think that's going to be. What hasn't occurred, and I hope to make these projections by the end of August, is any sort of a year-end projection decrease on the revenue side for just our application fees. I'm certainly there will need to be an adjustment. I'm hesitant to make that determination on 45 days of experience, but I think in the next 2 weeks, I'll have a little bit more time and then a little bit more confidence in what that looks like. Certainly, as we have opportunities to reduce our expenditures, we will do that. And so, many of you are aware that we began that process last fiscal year. So that's managers are very aware of where we're at, and staff are as well. And so everyone's really, in my opinion, doing what they can to help offset some of those revenue decreases.
The other piece, just as Sherry mentioned, engaging with COBA, trying to understand big projects. The last fiscal year, there was a bit of a rush to meet our deadlines at the end of June, but City of Bend, with their special legislation that allowed to fast track the Stevens Track Road to get it into the urban growth boundary. So they're paying for an urban growth boundary. We have Core 3. Which is the regional emergency training center, or that's an urban growth boundary amendment zone change. So that's in the Redmond wastewater treatment facility, right? That was an application that was submitted last fiscal year. And so when you think of city projects on the periphery that could trigger urban growth boundary amendments, they're in our queue right now, but I'm not aware of any on the horizon. Certainly Sisters is not, to my knowledge, is not planning for an immediate urban growth boundary amendment. I think they're revisiting their comprehensive plan update. So that's another factor. We do have several plan amendment zone changes that eventually will get to the Board of County Commissioners. Those aren't on a 150-day timeline. They paid last fiscal year. So it's those various factors, and then coupled with, again, this is all anecdotal. Our building official, Randy Scheid, monthly has coordination meetings with Central Oregon building officials, as well as kind of statewide with the state building division. And the general sense that we're gleaning is that this kind of slowdown is or volatility is happening throughout the state. I think for the city of Bend, you know, what I see driving around the community, they may be seeing a slowdown potentially, but there's a lot of multifamily building projects if you drive around town and so those are, as we talked about, commercial projects. If you know, based on valuation and structure those to where a very small percentage can go to other divisions, it can help maintain stability within an apartment. So I'm making an educated guess that the city of Bend is maybe seeing a little bit of a slowdown, but the investments in multifamily projects are still steady. I've seen notices of annexation that are forthcoming. So it's, you know, it makes, you could presume that they're going to see some more activity around their urban edge through annexation and master planning. And then the emphasis in multifamily, obviously there's what I'm calling the enterprise zone by the Crux Brewery, right? That's been, I think that finally got an entitlement or got a master plan. So there's some dense development that's being planned and proposed for the city of Bend. So that's just anecdotes.
It's interesting though, because the solid waste was actually at 11%. And, you know, that number came after I went to, you were, you know, down at 6% for a year to date. But they were at 11%, and usually, okay, so it is summer, people are going to the landfill, but, you know, a lot of times that's indicative of something actually being built.
Right. And that could be, you know, the projects happening in Redmond, projects happening in Bend, the activity that we're still seeing around resorts.
Well, they're building the woodland houses because we drove by it last night. There's quite, you know, that project seems to be going ahead.
Right.
I can also add that, you know, you'll recall that the budget committee and the board were very generous in giving us fee increases for this budgetary year. But we're really just kind of getting the applications that were delivered on July 1st or after. So soon enough, I'm hoping to see those fee increases really benefit us, but that just has not happened yet.
So, thing I picked up, because we've kind of been talking about this, but last year's fiscal year budget 11.6 came in at 9.4. This year we're budgeting 10.4. You're already projecting 9.7, which may even be, and I'm just looking at the bottom line of the resources here. But I mean, that's a downward trend.
Yes. And just to emphasize, we're trying to be mindful of this volatility. We're committed to maintaining our operational integrity. And yet we need to be manage our department within its means. And so managers are coordinating, and we're you know, no decisions are being made. We're just really monitoring the revenue that's come in over the last 45 to 50 days. And as Sherry noted, we think we'll be able to extrapolate by the end of the month and have a better understanding of how we can proceed with some certainty, with some confidence, again, to ensure that operationally we still remain intact, and how do we manage our reserve funds in a way that's responsible and prudent. You know, during the Great Recession, we burned through pretty hard through those. And my inclination is we don't want to find ourselves in that same situation. We need to be using that as a supplement to align with the development activity that we are projecting to have, and that it suggests will occur. So it's a bit of a balancing act, but something that we're very attuned to, and we'll certainly keep administration and the board abreast of to ensure that we're continuing to meet your expectations and our customers' expectations, you know, when they need our services for development review and whatnot.
Well, and then just like we started with long range planning. You know, last year we were looking at $1 million, and then 900,000. Now an estimated 766,000. But this clear and objective freight train coming at us too. I mean, we need all the horsepower we could need there. So that's a big dichotomy.
Yeah, and I think managing expectations is gonna be
Yeah.
critical. Peter Russell, our senior transportation planner, did retire. We have him under a contract basis in a limited duration at the road department's request to provide assistance to Tarek Rollins, who is now his replacement, but to help to the finish line, the transportation system plan and the Tumalo community plan. So we have his presence there, not for a lot of hours. And once those projects are finished, we will not retain him, in which case we would be down an FTE for long range. And we're certainly not proposing to fill what would be, Tarek received a promotion for received a promotion for senior transportation planners. So we have essentially a vacant associate planner position, and we're not inclined to fill that. We're well aware of the board's priorities for long range planning. We have a lot of projects that are headed to the board this fall very quickly. The comprehensive plan update, the Tumalo community plan, the transportation system plan. We need to bring back the rural accessory dwelling unit amendments for consideration of first reading. Senate Bill 1013, which relates to RVs as a secondary dwelling, that's about to get kicked off legislatively. All our coordination duties, which I could rattle off, but I won't. So we're doing everything we can while not burning out our staff. There's only so much bandwidth there.
So right now you do have 3.2 unfilled positions, and you're just, those are positions that you really don't need to fill at this moment in time, that till we know.
That would be our recommendation. Good news, one of our plans examiners, building inspectors, just the last week, maybe 10 days, just took the test and passed the commercial plans examiner test. So exciting opportunity for professional growth. So we think that will help eventually provide capacity on the commercial plans examining front. But yeah, the optics right now, I'm trying to fill those positions, I don't think would be prudent.
There's we may have a distorted perception of it sitting where we sit in relation to all the ADU policy discussion going on, but I just have this perception that there's all these people who are wanting to come in and do ADU pre-application meetings. I was wondering if you're starting to see that, but B, yeah, it would be great to get a better understanding of how you provide that service, pre-application.
Yeah, happy to.
Support for people, because there's no fees until the application comes in, and yet, it's a huge policy goal for us to see these ADUs either get converted from previously, structures that are living in the shadows, or new ADUs. So we would want to make sure that we have the capacity to provide those pre-application services to people until the application fees start rolling in.
Yeah, we are well prepared for just such a situation where we get significant inquiries. Kyle Collins, who was participated briefly in the first agenda item this afternoon, was out on a 2-week vacation. So he comes back to bring back the set of amendments to the board for consideration on first and possibly second reading. We're going to come back in a couple of weeks. What I want to make sure we're in a position to do is, when we come back and the board, I'm not trying to be presumptuous, but to the extent that the board is ready for adoption and there's an effective date, say for 30 days, that at the moment you adopt that ordinance, we have the ability that very moment to set out our public outreach campaign. So what we're doing with our staff right now is we have systems analysts that we're customizing our website. We're doing an FAQ. We want to get the ability to sign up for updates on rural ADUs. So I'm grateful that you asked that question because we know how important it is for the board to get this code adopted. What comes with that is to ensure that we're ready to respond to all those inquiries. And we have such an extraordinary team, Tim Berg, Ines Curlin, our system analysts, our managers, our staff. There is an internal working group that is assembling to prepare that information so that people know that are interested in this opportunity, know first and foremost what they need to do as a starting point. And here's a spoiler. They need to talk to on-site wastewater. They need to make sure that the eligible properties are suitable for on-site wastewater. So,
Or how expensive an upgrade might be.
correct.
Even if it's suitable. it
Yeah,
may be
yeah, you have to
very
go through
expensive, yeah.
spoiler, you have to go through a site evaluation. So what the last thing we want is for people to think, oh my gosh, if amendments are adopted, I'm gonna buy these properties and I can make these assumptions that an ADU can be cited because there are certain properties physically that could have challenges. So to your, again, Commissioner Chang for raising that question. It's gonna take us a couple of weeks to come back. And I know that there's tremendous interest in getting this adopted, but I want to make sure that our team, when that adoption date happens, we're working with Eric Brion, we're working with all of our newsletters. We've got that information is seamlessly disseminated so that the public knows exactly who to call. There's as much information online that they can navigate through FAQ. And then to the extent there are pre-apps, we'll get them in. So I think
Sounds like they're gonna have surgery.
was that the pre-apps?
Yeah.
Yeah, post, yeah, right.
I'm thinking surgery.
Yeah, no surgery, just pre-application meetings. So I think we have the ability to accommodate this demand. We just need systems in place, which it's gonna take us a couple weeks. So bear with us on that.
And if there's that. If the on-site wastewater is like a key first order question, does that mean when the pre-app requests start flowing, we really need to make sure that Todd Cleveland shop is fully staffed, fully trained, fully operational?
And we think that they are. So, ultimately you can have a pre-app, which we can schedule, but the first thing that one is going to need to do is apply for a site evaluation. And that's $700 approximately. And that's where the analysis is performed and communicated. And once that happens and they're like, oh, if there are options, I understand the relative costs, then they would find themselves applying for a development permit. And that permit's gonna be $700. It's basically a checklist. So it's not a land use decision where there are discretionary criteria based on the direction from the board. So there are site evaluation. If that checks out, then they get their development permit, which brings them, they're familiar with the building hardening standards, the setbacks from the ADU to the primary dwelling. So all of that will flow through, and then they get the development permit. And then at that point, if it works out in our communication strategy, they would hire a design professional, be like, design an ADU that is consistent with the code.
900 square foot.
There you go. What we're trying to avoid is someone who's elated and just engaged and makes assumptions that they find themselves in a predicament where they're not eligible because of septic. And so I feel like our department is well positioned to accommodate this demand. The inquiries that we've seen today, we have a dedicated website. The last time it was checked, there were like 15 inquiries, 15 to 20. So not a lot, but not a little. So we need to, and there may be more. So more to come on that. And when that program goes live, we'll send you those links so you can see how well we've structured it.
I actually think we should do some kind of a social media campaign because we did have like 2,000 lots that were eligible for adding not only an ADU to the single family home that doesn't exist right now. And that's to me like a different marketing thing for realtors out there to like say, hey, not only can you build your single family home here, but you can actually legally build something for your in-laws or whatever, and just remind people
It's a
that
great
it's,
suggestion, and we can reach out. I'm happy to reach out.
I mean,
to
there was, I
Cohort Core.
think there was like a couple thousand
Yeah.
there that maybe they weren't all legal, but $1,500, that's a great opportunity for people that want to move here, but they'd love to move here with their family.
Right, and it's something that we should promote. And your point's well taken, and we will certainly maximize this informational campaign. So it aligns with, and not being presumptuous, but if the board were to adopt an ordinance, we're ready to go.
Great. Thank you. If I could add, the city of Bend, when they rolled out their ADU code, they actually, in cooperation, I think, with Leadership Bend, created an ADU development guide that might be pertinent. And I think one of the important factors to consider right now in this high interest rate environment is how are people going to fund these? I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're going to have. So if we're able to kind of walk them through that process, or at least point them in the right direction, because people are going to be excited about doing it, but unless they have access to a home equity line of credit or capital that they can put into this project, they're going to be difficult to finance. So if we can help guide that process, part of the communication strategy on the front end.
Sure. We can certainly explore that. There have been some communities that have established templates for rural ADU design. That brings a whole other set of challenges and logistical issues. But we can certainly, as we get closer to rolling this out, look at the city of Bend's program, see if there's elements that are worth highlighting as an informational resource. We have to be super careful that we're not advocating or supporting a certain entity or whatnot, but well said. We can certainly explore
The
that.
chamber did something really significant too, because I think there were only like 452 or some little number had been built. But the other thing is, if someone has an illegal one that actually can meet the parameters of that 100-foot and everything, will they have to pay a fee to make it legal now?
I mean, my initial response would be, they're gonna have to, if they have a structure that qualifies, from a distance and has the right living floor, they're gonna still have to get it reviewed from a structural standpoint, electrical, plumbing, mechanical. And so there would be some fees, but we would be working with them. It wouldn't be in a punitive way.
Okay.
This whole program is to the extent that there are those opportunities to get them to an entitlement to a functioning septic system, among other things. So I don't think it would be punitive, but will there be permits? Absolutely.
Well, I just think it would be wonderful because I do know there's a few out there. And if some of them can be legal now, because that is like workforce housing.
Right.
And for them to be able to legally use it, I think it's great.
Okay, well, this was an in-depth analysis of our community development financial report for July.
Yeah, thank you.
So
Thank you, good discussion.
So I just want to, thanks Sherry, thank you, Peter, for coming in and talking about this one in particular, suggestion as well. So just as a reminder to the board, so as we talk about the County General Reserve Fund, and we think of why we need to have a fund, why we're protective, I'll use the word protective or mindful of those funds, is because we do have a number of funds, I'd say on our watch list, right, or concern list, which includes CDD. Obviously, we talked about the Health Benefits Fund, that fund as well. We talked about the TRT, Transient Room Tax Fund, which also helps fund our reserve. Clerk's office, where usually they're a net contributor to the general fund, but because of their revenue is down, the general fund doesn't have that revenue. And then, of course, the sheriff's office, rural district with their expenditure. So there are a number of funds that we're mindful of, and this is one of them. And they do a great job of, even here, their revenues are 6%, their expenses are 6%, 1 month. But last year you did a good job of, aligning those. So we are mindful of the funds that we do want to watch. So thank you for coming as well. And that's it.
Great, thanks.
So how long have you been with the county?
October will be 24 years.
Yeah, I'm so appreciative. Peter, you're so lucky.
Yeah, I've been here as of this month, 19.
Wow. Oh, well,
Thank you.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, other items, anything else? So Commissioner Chang, I attended the homeless coordinated office and I handed out this homeless report, which you may have seen electronically, but here's the paper version of that. And then that contract follow-up that the sheriff's office to finding that it goes to the chair. So I don't know if you saw that, I provided it.
Yeah, I had a chance to take a look at the contract. I was very troubled to see that it had been signed in early July, and I never even heard about it until it was the finished product was announced at the Oregon Homeless Response Office last week. And I have not had a chance to read the report yet, but I also found that the scope of work in the contract, I do not think it was very detailed or thorough. So I am concerned about the kind of product that would come out of basically a very skinny scope of work.
Yeah, so the sheriff initiated that contract. This is the report and this is what we received. So that's what it is.
I really wish the sheriff had coordinated with other entities prior to moving forward with this study or whatever he's choosing to call it.
So and then Kevin Dogman's available if you want to communicate with him also. As I say, I met him a couple weeks before now, a couple weeks before this all started happening. Didn't have this information either. But I have made a relationship with him. He did, join Sunday on that Saturday at the Public Land Stewards cleanup. So he's available if you want to communicate with him also.
And I did have an amazing experience Saturday driving out of my gate and checking my mail was Anthony Rodman rode up on his bicycle with two other people from Bend and said, Patty, I really support the Gales property. I think it's really ideal. I think you should talk to Dave Doyle about House Bill 2006. And he went on and I said, Anthony, to me, it really makes more sense. It's 9 acres between two churches.
Show me your horses.
Yes.
Good
They were
job.
right there. They were right. They come when I call them, right? Magnus came up. No, he was standing out there. So anyway, but it was amazing. So this morning I emailed him and I said, could you please send a letter to the governor with your support of this? And he asked me who to send it to, and I told him the governor. So he responded to me and waiting to hear back. The state is going to let us know they're having a meeting on Wednesday. They're going to let us know if they have any property. But he goes, no, he goes, Patty, I think it's a really good idea. So, it's not a matter of timing though. It's not amazing. I could have been leaving like 2 minutes before. So anyway.
Anthony also Councilor Rodman also as an attorney doesn't really agree with county legal counsel's interpretation that.
Right, that's what he said.
What we want to do is not allowed. We're already under House Bill 2006, so we could could choose to unpack that a little bit more, decide whether whether we're interested in taking some risks, essentially some land use risks.
Yeah, that's what he was saying. And he was actually with a couple other attorneys on the other two cycles. So.
There's a whole farm meeting.
I know, I was like, well, yes. Anyhow, so I just thought I would share that with you guys.
Thank you.
So we have what, Wednesday? Do we have any executive today?
No, just a quick heads up on another item for Wednesday. County College will kick off early this year, starting in a week from tomorrow. So Stephanie will be coming under other items on Wednesday to review the presentation for the opening session with the board and to get any feedback that you may have.
It's only a day earlier than last year, because last year it was on my anniversary.
Well, I'm glad we were able to make that adjustment.
I know, it's on the 29th this year, so then on the 30th. I can celebrate my anniversary.
Great, I'm glad. So we'll move forward and Stephanie will come before you. She sent out a draft for review. So
we'll do that this Wednesday.
we are, and then she'll
Okay.
come back on Monday for additional kind of final review if needed.
Right. All right.
Anything else? Meeting adjourned.
Oh. Brenda?